So before we even get into the languages themselves, HTML and CSS, let's just take a step back and consider the design principles that web design come from. A lot of what you are going to see in the text and a lot of what we are going to discuss either here through the videos or during, the can I call them the class Zoom times, whatever technology it is we've settled on to use for those. A lot of the vocabulary, the nomenclature, those pieces of jargon. It's those pieces of jargon that allow you to kind of have a shorthand for the design that we're using for web design. All of that stems from older media. So media are things like print media. They're things like magazines, newspapers, things like that. So we're going to talk about when we design finally larger vertical web pages, we're going to talk about above the fold, which is an old magazine term. When we look here in chapter 3, which is next week already, when we look at chapter 3 at some of the color and the font principles and the just the balancing of pages so that we have images and we have text and we have them in a way that makes sense for the screen as we can see it. All of those take their cues from traditional media, print media for the most part. So that is one of the things that we'll kind of take a step back and let that be one of the driving factors in how it is that we see web design. Is we're really looking at interactive print media or interactive multimedia in a whole host of different forms. So we'll get there for that. Before we look at the languages themselves, HTML and CSS, we do also I think we do ourselves a service if we understand a little bit behind the scenes, actually behind the cranium, of how your mind processes languages. I'm referring now with no distinction between a verbal language, between a written language, between a language that you would actually code here on a computer. Your brain sees them all very, very similarly. So the way we are going to approach HTML and CSS for this class is what I like to call conversationally. So we are going to start in a very conversationally limited way. Where is the bathroom, things of that nature, like you would have seen in a Spanish class in high school potentially. And by the time we're done, we can have much more in-depth conversations with more meaning to them. So the way your brain, settles on how do I actually use and apply this language is going to be the same way it was when you learned it verbally the first time, and that's going to be through repetition. You'll notice in the chapters there are a host, just a ton of hands-on practice. What we use the hands-on practice for is a kind of muscle memory. It is a conversation builder. The next phase to that is the case studies. At the end of the chapter, there are always two case studies, the Pacific Trails Resort and the Path of Light Yoga Studio. Now, I'm going to make this easier on me and you when you are reading it and I am typing it. I'm going to call them PTR, Pacific Trails Resort, and I'm going to call them POLYS, P-O-L-Y-S, Path of Light Yoga Studio. So those two pieces are going to help you build your conversational HTML and CSS. The hands-on practice are you repeating, the words like you would see before you hop in a cab when you're at some faraway land, right? And then the case studies and the other projects that we do, those are you really having conversations in HTML and CSS. So what I try to do is limit the amount of time that here probably in a video or a mixed multimedia, so either podcast or video. What I try to do is limit the time that we all spend together, whatever that's going to mean here for the online only track. But what I'm going to try and do is limit the time that we spend typing things together. What I want to do is highlight what you saw in the text, because I have every faith that you can read. What I want to do is highlight rather what you saw in the text and show you examples of how you see that on the web, show you examples of where you've seen that in print media so that you actually have a literally tangible version of it. And then what we'll do is spend just a little bit of time taking the code base, those things that you see in the text, and we'll expand on those so that you can really move the ball farther than if all we did was develop what we see in the textbook and then take tests on it. I don't find that there's a ton of value to that. When you are done with the material as we have it, what you'll have is a portfolio that demonstrates to you, and it would demonstrate to an employer, potential employer, that you do in fact know how to build a modern web page, and you can do it with the most bare bones of tools, which is a colossal advantage to you.